Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Comedy. My name is Gary Michaels and this channel is dedicated to new comedians. So if you're starting out in your comedy career, then go ahead, hit the subscribe button and join the community. On today's video, I am going to give you 20 stand-up comedy writing tips. On this channel, I do like to go into as much detail as I can, and I will try my best to do that within each tip. However, 20 tips is a lot, and what I really want this video to do for you is to be guidance for you to come back to whenever you are stuck in your comedy writing sessions. You can come back to this video. I will timestamp each tip in the description box so you can click on whatever one appeals to you the most and get learning and get writing the best comedy you possibly can. Without any more teasing it and dragging it on, let's get to tip number one. The first tip is one of the most well-covered techniques of writing comedy, which I thought I would get it out of the way first, and that is the idea of working backwards. If you are stuck in your writing session, think of the punchline, think of the absurd position you are going to be in at the end of the story. Think of whatever scenario you want to come up with and start to slowly work backwards. Rather than having a funny moment or funny punchline in your head and thinking too far back and starting at the start and trying to connect the dots on how to get there in the end, you slowly work backwards. So if you have an absurd point of view, or if an absurd thing happened to you, or whatever style of comedy you are performing, slowly just take one step back and think how you came to that from an immediate point of view. And then after that, you can start to move a little further back. And then the more you move back, the wider and more information you put into this story. And of course, the more punchlines you start putting into it. So you can see that one punchline will equal as many punchlines as you want if you keep going further back. And if you watch successful comedians over and over again on all of their shows, they have long pieces of information, long stories, and within that story are many other stories. And all they do is think of a couple of punchline, a couple of funny things to say, whatever style they're in, and work backwards, and do that all the time. You'll never run out of ideas and it'll be more fun rather than starting at the start and knowing where you end up and trying to join the dots in the middle. It's just too complicated. Pick a funny position and work backwards from it. Here's tip number two. The second tip is to switch the punchlines within your set around with each other. Now that might sound like you are going to destroy the material and destroy the direction of your set, and maybe it will at the beginning, but the goal here is to switch punchlines around with each other, and then it's up to you to make sense of it. It's up to you to connect the two opposite points of view, the two different topics you're discussing, and make it work. If you take punchline A and put it into section B, and punchline B and put it into section A, it's not going to make sense. And as a writer, as a creator, and as a comic, it is up to you to connect the dots and make that work. And within that, there are more stories and more punchlines to be found. Here's tip number three. Take one of your punchlines and write out a very short story form without any jokes. Just write out how you came to that conclusion with your punchline, and then after that, rewrite it and make it as funny as you possibly can. And all of this creativity came from just having one punchline. So if you have a line in your head, or you have an idea in your head that you think is humorous and there's some fun to it, but you don't really have a setup yet, and you are having a hard time creating a setup, well, just write out a story as to how you came to that conclusion without any jokes. You don't need to stress yourself out and always be creating the best humor and the best jokes that you're going to tell on stage immediately. No, absolutely not. A writing session is just about getting creative, and sometimes it's easier on us just to write out no jokes how we got in a very factual way how we got to this absurd point of view, and then rewrite your story without the jokes and then put the jokes into it when you rewrite it a second time. That way you can focus one on just creating the story and not having the burden of having it to be funny, and the second you already have the story and now you just have to make it funny. So you don't stress yourself out by having to do two things, you just do one thing after the other, and then within that, yet again, there are more punchlines to be found when you think fresh and get the punchlines in there with the story already written. Here's the next tip. Tip number 4 is, instead of creating just one punchline, write 3. So rather than just finishing the piece of material or the long story or your entire set with just one punchline, give them the first punchline, wait for the laughter to start to die off, and then hit them with the second, and wait for the laughter to just about die off again, and then one more time. 3 is the magic number, and don't get lazy when you think of the best punchline, because the best punchline never really exists. There's always another one to be had. Now, if you can't think of 3 straight away, don't stress yourself out to it, but keep coming back to that piece of material, because you might be creating on a story elsewhere and write a punchline that fits perfectly as a secondary punchline after your first one, and then later on you'll come up with a third punchline. And pieces of comic material performed on stage that have 3 punchlines to wrap up the point of view will go down obviously a lot stronger than if you just perform one, because you keep hitting them when they don't expect it, because they only expect to have one good line, and if you hit them with 3, well, they'll be more entertained, they'll remember you, and you will be simply smashing it. Tip number 5 is to spare some time during your comedy writing to write about your overall character development. It's not always just about writing out jokes, which is a great thing to be doing and should be done consistently. But what also should be done consistently is, how far are you growing as a character? You need to keep a journal on that. And I've said it on this channel many, many times. By writing down a kind of a diary-like progression for your onstage character and the kind of topics you're going to discuss on stage and how far you're willing to go with jokes in the term of being offensive or absurd, or all of the characteristics you are on stage, you need to write down and understand them fully. That way, when it does come to writing the jokes, you know exactly what topics you should be covering. You're not just sitting and looking at a blank piece of paper and thinking, oh, who am I on stage? What do I want to talk about? That should be done separately, and it should be done as consistently as the writing of the jokes and the material that is going to be said. Work on your character, keep updating it, keep adding to it, know exactly who it is you are on stage, and you'll be able to start to improvise and respond to the audiences and talk to the audiences and write, create and perform in exactly the style you want, because you understand who it is you are. Here's the next tip. The next tip is not going to help your comedy writing in any way whatsoever. However, I really appreciate it. It takes a lot of work making these videos, and all I want you to do is hit the like button. Let me know you're enjoying it and getting value from the content. It also lets YouTube know that you are getting value from it, and therefore it shows it to more people and we bring more people into the community. Simple as that. Hit the like button right now, and of course, if you want me to make a video on any topic you have and you want me to discuss, all you have to do is drop into the comment section and let me know what that question is, and I will do my very best to cover it in an entire video in the near future. Go ahead, hit the like button right now. Let's get back to the video. Tip number 6 is to rewrite your offensive jokes and make them clean. That way you'll be always able to perform for any audience. The last thing you want to do is perform really offensive material for an audience that don't appreciate it and a booker that does not want to book that sort of act. You are there for the audience, and I know sometimes comedians are all about, well, I should have the right to say whatever I want to say, and yeah, that's true in some clubs, but the reality is that people who get the majority of the work, most of the work, the people who come out, the comedians, the people who get the majority of the work, the comedians are who are working the most, can also perform a very clean set, because a lot of people wanting comedians want them to perform clean material. So have your offensive material ready to go whenever it needs to and enjoy performing that, but also have a clean version of your set and never let yourself down by not being able to get the best out of the situation on the stage. And always have whatever kind of a set that you want to perform. You still create the set, it still has your vibe to it, it still has your attitude, but it's slightly cleaner and can go over on any audience. And then when it's time to be offensive, hit them where it hurts. Here's the next one. Tip number 7 is about curing writer's block. If you're staring at a piece of paper and you can't even put the pen on it and get creative because you just have no ideas whatsoever inside of you, the best thing to do is write down famous comedians' routines that you can remember. The comedians' routines that you enjoy listening to. Start writing down their bits. And after about 2 or 3 minutes of just writing comedy that you remember, it doesn't matter if it's somebody else's. After a while, you won't want to do that anymore. You will already have an idea. You'll have a topic. You'll have something will jump into your mind that you go, oh, there's something there. There's something with that. And then you'll put aside the other person's material and you'll get creating your own. It's all just about getting the ball moving, even just a little bit. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is just write down anything that we can remember. And since it's comedy and you're always going to remember your favorite routines, or maybe you won't remember your favorite routines and you'll get a little bit wrong, and within that it'll spark something in your imagination and get you creative. So it's not always about getting as original at the very beginning, because that can come later. At the beginning, when you're just stuck looking at a piece of paper, sometimes all it needs is just writing for 3 minutes, whatever it is, and then away you go. Here is the next tip. Tip number 8 is to try and write more jokes than just one great joke. Because if you try and think of one great joke without actually writing anything, you're going to stress yourself out. Instead, try and write as many jokes as you possibly can for a particular story or piece, or in your 5, 10, 20 minute set. Try and cram in as many jokes as you can, and perhaps give yourself a time of 5 minutes and see how many jokes you can write in the 5 minutes. And the goal here isn't to write great jokes, it's to write lots of jokes. And of course, if you just start writing without thinking, you start writing jokes, whatever is funny to you, you are going to stumble across something that is going to work. Let's say if you write down 30 jokes in 5 minutes, well, maybe 2 or 3 of them are really, really great, and they're going to stay with you for quite a while. And that's much better time spent than sitting there looking at a blank piece of paper thinking, there's a joke in here somewhere, I just need to find out. And then you think of one and it's not good enough, and then you have to think of another one that's not good enough, and nothing gets written down. Instead, write down all the jokes, and then you can be the judge with them all written out, and you don't have to think about them over again and misremember them and not believe in them anymore because they're in your head and you're just too confused to really give it a good think about. Instead, write them all down, have them all out in front of you, and give them the focus they deserve, because there are punchlines in there that are waiting to be found by you. So write more, write very quickly, rather than taking your time and wasting time, stressing yourself out, thinking in front of a blank piece of paper. Set at any amount of timer and write as many jokes as you possibly can. Here's the next tip. Tip number 9 is to create 2 opposing characters when you're in your writing session. Now, what I mean by that is, obviously, as a comic, as a writer, as a performer on stage, you are going to be expressing the topics of interest that are important to you, and you're going to be expressing them with your own opinions. Well, it's great in your writing session to kind of create your material and your jokes as if you're having a conversation with a person with opposing viewpoints. So someone on completely the opposite end of your opinions and beliefs and attitude, and kind of like have a back and forth conversation. In that way, you'll be able to come up with punchlines for both points of view. Because I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a political comedian. By your audience knowing where you stand politically, they might be able to guess the kind of material that you are going to be talking about on stage. Now, that might be all right, but you don't want your audience to be ahead of you. You don't even want your audience to be at the same level as you. You want to be surprising them all the time. And by having an opposing point of view thought about, regardless of what style it is and what attitude it is, by understanding it and writing comedy from it and from your point of view, you're going to hit all targets and you're going to give the audience a much fresher style of comedy, something that they haven't seen all that often, and they'll be surprised by the outcome on most of your stories and punchlines. You'll always keep them guessing, and they will not be one step ahead of you. Instead, you'll be 10 steps ahead of them, because you know that they will assume you are such a thing because of the way you address the audience and the information you give them, and then you can turn it all on its head by understanding the opposing point of view as well. It's a deep one. I have covered this in other videos, but it's very, very important. It's a lot of fun to do, and yet again, there's a lot of material to be found within that. Create two opposing characters every single time you go into your writing, your own opinion and someone else's opinion too, and have that great clash between them, and humor is within there. Here's the next tip. Tip number 10 is to rewrite every single joke again. So every single punchline you have, rewrite it. Now this again is a very basic understanding of how jokes are formed, but I want you to continue to do this. I don't want you just to continue to rewrite the joke until it's funny enough to stay on stage. That's a great thing to do, and that should be obviously done all the time, because jokes aren't written for the first time, they are rewritten. That's where the funny lies. However, I don't want you to stop there, because later on down the road you're going to want to have different material to stay on stage. You're not going to want to repeat always the same set. Rather than creating a whole new sets are within the material you're already saying. So rather than saying, oh, all that's over now, I'm going to start fresh with a whole new piece of paper, no, take your old material and still again rewrite it, because you've already rewritten it before and you've already found humor in it. And now all you have to do is do that again. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes, the quicker you are at it, and you can attach it and get used to connecting it to any story, even the current story you're trying to talk about, where at one stage you had no idea where to do that, but now because you've written and written and rewritten jokes over and over again, it becomes natural to you to be able to connect it to any story you want. Even if it goes a little absurd, you know how to deal with that kind of thing on stage now that you've had a little bit of experience. So rewrite all your jokes, and as I said in the previous point, from other people's point of view is a great thing to do as well. But rewriting jokes again and again and again is a fantastic way of rehashing it, making it feel fresher, and it's a great tool for getting creative without looking at a blank piece of paper. Here's the next tip. Tip number 11 is to start some writing sessions by simply writing down your name, age, sex, location, all of those kind of demographic things that you fit into. Now, you might ask why, but yet again, this is just to get creative. It's just to get the ball rolling. By simply writing down a few of the basic pieces of information about yourself, then after you do that, you can look at it and pick and choose which one you're going to want to talk about. Let's say you write down your age. Well, there's loads of humor to be done there. So you just write down your age and go, okay, well, I'll talk about my age today. It's just a way of listing a menu of what you're going to write about. And what better than writing about yourself, because that's always what's going to be most honest, and it's always a great place to go on stage, is to talk about yourself, because most of the time other people who are the same age or a similar occupation or something about the sex you are or whatever it is, most people feel kind of the same way. And if you can point out a few humorous flaws or humorous point of view about it, they're going to really, really enjoy it. So by writing down a little menu, all the demographic, anything about yourself, write down a description. It doesn't need to be funny, because the funny will come later. And the more information you write down about yourself at the beginning of your writing session, the more you will have to choose on what you are going to dissect and make funny and make a whole set out of. Here's the next tip. Tip number 12 is to write down a day in the life of somebody else. Perhaps somebody you know close, perhaps somebody you don't know, like a fictional person that has all these bizarre beliefs, or perhaps it's a famous person or a celebrity. Write down a day in their life and make it as funny as you can. And by doing this, you're not putting yourself in the position. You're not doing the day-to-day things with the attitude and the beliefs and the opinions that you hold. You're doing it from from a whole different person. So if you pick a celebrity, you might have an opinion on what that celebrity might do or how they might go about interacting with people in a day and interacting with situations. And by jotting it all down, you're going to come to some very fresh and very new for you, original, funny places that you would never do if you had your own belief set behind writing out just a simple day and things that occur to you. So think about someone you know or someone you don't know and write an entire day that they got up to and make it as funny as possible. And who knows, that in itself might be your next 5-minute routine. Here's the next tip. Tip number 13 is to rewrite your entire set onto a computer. And every time you finish writing out a punchline, I want you to hit enter twice. That way, after you write your entire set, you can print it out or else just maximize it on the screen so you can see the entire set, stand back and look at all of the places on the paper that has a large gap after it. They will be your punchlines, and you can see if the punchlines are consistent at a good rhythm throughout your set. Because if you have a large piece of information within that set that's no jokes coming, that is going to be where the audience are going to lose interest unless what you're telling them is really, really important and done well. However, I would urge to stay away from that and keep them laughing as often as they possibly can. So by hitting enter after every single time you have a punchline, you are able to see, rather than reading through your set all the time and thinking about the punchlines, you can just see with your own eyes if they are consistent and at a good rhythm, or if some appear too quick and then there's a large piece of information, you need to address that and maybe mix around the set a little bit, because you want a nice rhythm and flow to your set. Because if you have an easy to access rhythm and flow to your set, the audience will sit into it from the beginning and they will expect the laughs to come when they do, and they will appreciate the laughs coming when they do. Let's move on to the next one. Tip number 14 is, if you want to express a really unique point of view, write down a conversation two well-known figures from history would have if they were discussing the topics that you are going to discuss. So what the hell does that mean? Well, let's say you're talking about a particular job or a particular day you had. Pick two very famous, very well-known figures from history, someone that you are going to easily have opinions about, and have them discuss what the topic is about with each other. It's kind of like a mix of some of the other techniques I've given you so far, only this one, it's even funnier and crazier, because I would urge you to pick figures from history, historical figures, not just celebrities, but by picking historical figures, people who have not been connected to comedy and have done other things in their life, well, by putting them in funny situations and expressing their opinion on things, well, that might be hilarious in itself. It might even not be a writing technique and be funny just to say on stage that you've thought about this in a dream, or imagine these two people having this conversation, or you can get to them talking about it in whatever way you want to do creatively. But even as a writing technique, it's a very good place to come and uncover some very bizarre and very fresh ideas for stories and punchlines. So two figures from history talking about your topics that you are going to discuss on stage. You cannot go wrong. It's a fun one to do. Let's move on to the next one. Number 15 is to try and create a joke, a piece of information followed by a punchline that is so obvious the audience are going to think of the punchline before you say it. And then, obviously, at the last moment, you change the direction and the punchline is completely different. Now, this sounds a lot easier than it is, but a fun thing to do on stage is always to throw the audience off the topic, off the scent, off where they think the story is going. And the best way to do that is to keep the writing so obvious and so normal and so comic friendly. If you go to many comedy gigs, you will see that there's some topics that just always turn up, and those are the topics that audiences who love comedy are going to have a few jokes and have heard a few punchlines themselves. And remember, by you going up and addressing these very typical topics of interest like occupations or traveling or relationships, and nearly getting to a very common place or punchline, and then in the last moment changing it completely around and writing the most absurd, or whatever style of comedy that you do, change the goal, change the punchline, and hit them where they aren't expecting it to come from. It's a very, very fun place, creative place, and it will better you as a comic writer. Not easy to do, but give it a go. It is a lot of fun. Here's the next one. Tip number 16 is one of my favorites, and it is this: it is much easier to write material, write great comedy, when you are writing on topics that really motivate you and that you enjoy. It's harder to write material when you don't like a topic and you are complaining and all the material is around how much you dislike something and it's negative. Now, it's a fun thing to do, and it's great comedy can come from complaining. However, it should be left to do after you have more experience as a performer and as a writer. At the very beginning, it's important, write a material that you enjoy, because the topics that you enjoy make you feel better, and you simply spend longer at the practice of writing good comedy about it. And on top of that, if you go onto stage at the beginning and it takes a while to fake anger about topics, because you don't want to go on stage depressed, actually feeling the feeling you do about the topics that you're complaining about. You want to save all that, and you want to perform negative material in a fun way so the audience don't think you're just miserable, because I see that happen a lot. It's a big mistake. New comedians getting on stage and complaining and think that they need to be the same demeanor as how it makes them feel, where it's not true. You should have a smile on your face in a kind of a cheeky way if you're complaining. The successful comedians who complain, you never see them not liking being on stage. They love complaining on stage. They might like the topic they're talking about, but there's a lot of joy in how they are describing it, and that takes a while. So at the beginning, it's much easier just to get used to the creative process and the performing process if you always stick to topics of interest that you enjoy, that motivate you, that make you feel good. Big tip. That's a really important one, and I hope you use it as often as possible. And then after you get more comfortable on stage, then you can start complaining about topics. But do leave it off, just like leaving off being offensive on stage. Both those things can come much, much later. Here is the next tip. Tip number 17 is, if you are burnt out and don't even want to face a pen and paper, you cannot start your comedy writing session. Well, it is better to do 5 minutes of writing every single day than it is to do an hour a few days a week, or 2 hours one day a week, and then do too much and burn yourself out. This thing about doing 3 hours a day or 2 hours a day and being really hard on yourself, it's not really going to help you in the long run. Sure, you might be able to do it for 10 days, but after completing 2 hours a day for 10 days, you might have some good material, but you're going to be burnt out and you're not going to keep it up long term. And the problem is, when people burn themselves out, they don't go from 2 hours to 5 minutes and just do a little bit and see the importance of just a little bit a day. Instead, they tend to go from 2 hours to nothing for about 3 weeks and beat themselves up about not doing anything creative, beat themselves up about not getting material out every day. It's just because you've done too much in the past. Instead, stick to 5 minutes and maybe work up to 35 minutes. 35 minutes of writing every single day is incredible. And if you can fit in just around that piece of time, or else a little more, but I would kind of urge away from the hour a day, because it's not really realistic with most of us to be able to get a full hour a day, because we have other things going on in our life, and you should have other things going on in your life that you all are also enjoying. So enjoy them and be a people watcher and think throughout your day in terms of comedy. That will stand to you as well, but just a little bit every single day will stop you from burning yourself out, and you will enjoy it. And even if you finish a 20-minute writing session and you've only set your time for 20 minutes and you have loads of other ideas, well, yes, you can keep going that day, but why not just jot down one word sentences or one word phrases for those ideas and see them the next day at your 20 minutes. That way you have something to start, something to look forward to. You know what you're going to be writing about that day, and you can look forward to your writing set and always have it be 20 minutes, because hey, Anyone has 20 minutes and we can all write for 20 minutes. It's really not that much to ask. And then after that, yes, add a little bit more time to it, but small bit every day and consistency is the key. This thing about 3 hours a day, it's only going to burn yourself out. And I don't think I have ever wrote for 3 hours a day for any amount of time. So that's that one. Let's move on to the next one. I'm nearly burnt out with this video. Tip number 18 is this. Instead of starting your comedy writing session on a blank piece of paper, instead add to the material you were writing on the previous session, because it's so much easier to continue writing than it is to start fresh, just the same way as is with anything at all, in terms of writing songs or whatever it is. If it's creating, it's easier to add on to something you already have rather than starting all over again. And by adding on to something you already have, you are bettering, that's definitely not right, but it's at the end of the video. I'm getting tired. We'll accept it. Bettering the previous piece of information. You are making it better. That is better. I'm just gonna edit this and we'll do it again. And by adding to pieces you already have, you are making that material better rather than just leaving it and forgetting about it, because as I always say, material can be made better all the time. So instead of starting your next writing session with a blank piece of paper, take out some very old piece of information if you want, very old routines, and add to them. And then the writing will start, you'll get creative, and that can be all a new set or it can be belonging to an old set. Either way, you've done another fantastic day writing. Let's move on to the next tip. Tip number 19 is you don't always need to be creating new jokes every time you're in your writing session. You can take old pieces of information, old stories, old punchlines, and move them all around. Simply by moving them around and connecting the dots, there is, yes, new material to be found within there, but also you can take a set you already have. Let's say it's a 5-minute set and you cover 3 topics of things that interest you in that 5 minutes. By simply moving things around, you might not need to write any new words at all. You might get a whole entire fresh set out of moving things around. And if they don't work, well then perhaps you do need to write some connection pieces down. They might be funny, they might not, but think that it's up to you to edit and add, and you don't always need to be adding. You can be taking away. It's your creative passage to go down. You can destroy your own sets and rip them apart and create them again and really understand where the funny lies in them. And by continuously to move things around, even if it is only a 5-minute set and you want to move things around and you perform at the same club again that you always perform at, that is a fresh set. To the other comedians who know your set, and to maybe even the audience who've heard it before, that is a huge fresh set all over again, and you haven't even put pen to paper. All you've done is mix things around, and you might have uncovered a much funnier piece of material by just shoving things where they didn't go before. That sounds wrong. I've been in this cupboard for a long time looking at myself on a monitor. Let's move on to the next tip. So the final tip, tip number 20, we've made it. I want to say before I finish, thank you for watching the whole video. It means a lot, and every single time anyone watches any of the videos or comments or does any of those things or hits the subscribe or hits the like button, it really, really does mean a lot, and it's great that I can, well, hopefully give you as much value as I possibly can. Here's tip number 20. As I said in the previous tip, you don't always need to be creating new jokes. Well, you don't always need to be in your writing session to create good comedy. And what I mean by that is I want you not, as I've said before in this video, to overdo the writing session. Instead, go out and live your life. Do all of the things you enjoy doing with the people you enjoy doing them with. And take note. And perhaps you might need to take out your phone a few times and write down ideas that come to mind during your time when you're having a good time. And as a comic, that's just going to be one of the things you do. Every now and then you take out your phone, or if you have a voice recorder and you very, very quickly just a very quick idea. You don't need to go into much detail because the people you're with are going to be annoyed and you're going to look like a crazy person every 5 minutes writing down too much detail. It just needs to be 2 words or 1 word, something that when you look back on it or listen back to it, you're going to remember what you meant by it. Very, very quickly. It just takes a few seconds, but go out and about, explore the world, do all of the fun things, and within living your life the fun way, that is where the real material comes from. By a person sitting alone in a cupboard like I'm doing now and thinking that they're going to come up with the next brilliant routine, you're not going to come up with a brilliant routine that way. You're going to come up with brilliant comedy out and about in the world, dealing with people, dealing with your job, dealing with your relationship, dealing with all the things that we all deal with on a daily basis, and how you see it and the message and the attitude and the opinions you have are entertaining and important, and by you expressing them the right way, people are going to be interested in listening to you on stage, especially if you follow as many of these tips on this video as possible. The ones that appeal to you, really bring them into your set, bring them into your writing session, and do them as often as you can. And the ones you don't agree with, well, maybe try them out one time, and even if you find it difficult to do them, well, you might uncover something funny within there as well. Thank you for watching this video. I said it before, it means so much to me, and I will do my best to continue making the best tutorial videos I possibly can for you. And if you haven't done so already, please do hit the like button. It means a lot, and I will see you on the next video.